Hey Badass, and welcome back to the Badass Careers YouTube channel, which is the place on the internet to build a career that feels meaningful and successful and to do work that you love. Today we're deep diving into one of the most commonly asked interview questions of all time, which is, what are your biggest weaknesses? So in this video, not only are you going to learn how to answer that question with an example, with a script, but also why are they asking this question in the first place, and how can you position yourself to come across as a high value hire, a premium product that they're going to want to hire and get to know even more. Every single interview question that you get is another opportunity to shine. This one's no different. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Okay, so how do you answer the question, what are your biggest weaknesses, or what are your weaknesses? So this question is quite sensitive because on one side, you don't want to be flaky, right? You don't want to say something like, oh, I'm too much of a perfectionist, or I'm just known to work too hard, or anything that comes across as a bit cheesy and inauthentic. I mean, these kinds of questions just make recruiters shudder. Honestly, I've been there in the room and it does not go down well. So on one side, you don't want to be that person, but on the other side, you also don't want to be dishonest. You know, I mean, humans can pick up on the cues of other people. Recruiters can see when you start to look nervous, you're avoiding eye contact, when you're lying, basically. And so if you come up with a completely made up example and you come across as a little bit dishonest or a little bit edgy, that's gonna raise major red flags as well.
Stop it. Get some help.
So you want to be honest, of course, but you don't want to be cheesy or have it as like a strength dressed up as a weakness or anything like that. So what do you do instead? Firstly, you're going to want to pick a weakness that's acceptable for the current position. So it's not going to be a required or desired skill that's there on the job ad when you've applied for the role. So it's going to be something that you're currently working on. So it's not something that you've already fixed as well. That's also really important when you answer this question, because if you choose something that you've already dealt with and it's no longer a weakness, then it doesn't really show that you're willing to be vulnerable, that you've got high levels of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. It just shows like, you know, oh, I had a weakness before, but now I don't have any. And that doesn't come across either. So you do want it to be something that you're honestly working on right now, but it's not a deal breaker for the current role. Another thing is that you want to make sure that it's skills-based. So it's something that could be trained. It's something that could be developed. So it's not necessarily an inherent personality trait or an interest or some sort of thing that makes you you and is going to be very hard to move. For example, I'm an overthinker, I'm pedantic, I'm shy, I'm risk averse. While these things can be coached and worked on, these kinds of behavioral patterns are actually quite tough to shift, and very inherent personality traits are quite hard to develop. And so you want to really err away from things like that and choose more a concrete skill that with the right manager or with the right training and development, if you genuinely, you know, were working on it for a few hours a week, over a period of time, it would be something that could improve. The reason for this is, of course, that while companies can train for the technical side of things, it's much, much harder for them to train for things like culture fit. So let's dive in step by step into the structure of your answer to this specific question. Basically, when it comes to answering what's your biggest weakness, you're going to want to tell a story of why this weakness has been detrimental to you in the past, the moment that you realized that it's a problem, and the steps that you've taken since then to be working on it. Again, it's not completely solved, but showing that you've taken that initiative and those first few steps when it comes to being better at this particular thing. So the basic structure of your answer, and I'm going to give you a concrete example right now, but the basic structure is going to be why it's a problem and provide a concrete example, why you know that it's important to change. So again, sending those signals of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and of course, what you've been doing about it. Okay, so let's dive into the first part of the answer, which is why it's a problem with an example. So take this for example. So one of my biggest weaknesses is my inability to push back, that confidence to really push back and to set boundaries and also communicate on reasonable deadlines. So in February this year, I found myself really juggling multiple priorities from 2 different line managers following a restructure. And what I found is that I was just adding and adding and adding to my workload by saying yes to both of them simultaneously and not actually reassessing my workload and juggling things and reprioritizing. What this meant is that I was pulling longer hours than necessary because everything was urgent, of course, and I was even working weekends, which of course when you've got, a project peak, it happens from time to time, but this was becoming quite consistent and I was definitely on track to burn out and doing all of this for work that was important but not necessarily urgent. Okay, so that's the first part of the answer. We've set the scene. We've actually highlighted what the issue is, so inability to push back and set boundaries. And we're actually talking about the moment in time, giving a story. Stories are more memorable for the human brain, about the time where you realize that it was really becoming an issue. The next part is that you want to give a hint that you realize why it's important to change and try and link this back to the business. So in this particular example, you could say something like, it's really important for me to work on this because when I look at the leaders in the top levels of the organization, the people that I look up to and aspire to be, they're able to sustain high levels of performance, but over a period of time, obviously without the overwhelm and without the burnout. And that's the kind of leader that I hope to become. And I know that they wouldn't be able to deliver at the level that they're delivering without being able to constantly reassess, reprioritize, and communicate to their stakeholders based on what they have going on in their portfolio at any one time. Now, the next part of the answer would be expressing, okay, so what have you been doing about it? So for this example, you might say something like this. So over the past month, what I've been doing is actually trialing some experiments and trying out a few different things to see what sticks and what works to help me to build that confidence in pushing back and communicating on my priorities. So one of those things has been to time block my calendar. So actually build in appointments in my calendar that give me time to do deep project work, to do my emails, to work on specific things based on my priorities at the moment. And I've actually opened that calendar to both managers so that they can see what I'm working on in any given week. I also communicate this in my weekly one-to-ones with my managers so that they can see the distribution of my time in any given week as well and say, hey, it looks like you're spending about half of your time on this project. I'd actually prefer you to pull that down and spend more time here. What I've also been doing is every time a manager gives me something new, I ask them about the deadline, trying to assess, is it really important or is it urgent? And how flexible can that deadline be? And if it is really urgent and it has to happen right now, what might we be able to shift and reshuffle within the week and push out so that it's feasible all within the workload of this week? I've also been practicing the way that I respond to requests. So for example, I'll say, sure, yes, of course, and I can get it to you by, and give them a reasonable deadline. Now again, if this is too late or they need it urgently before then it opens up a conversation to reshuffle. And it's just about that openness, that transparency, and that communication. It's still a work in progress, but I'm definitely seeing some firsthand results. So when you're providing really concrete examples of the things that you've been putting in place and working on, it really shows that you're, open-minded, you're self-aware, you're decisive, and you're the kind of person that constantly grows, learns, and develops themselves, which is essentially the kind of person that every employer wants to hire and have on their team. So badasses, I hope that this has been really useful in understanding how to best answer this question. What are your weaknesses? I know it's not the most comfortable question to answer, but if you're well prepared and you have an example like the one that I've shared, you're absolutely going to rock it. If you like all things career development and strategy, and you know that your career is a place where you want to find a lot of fulfillment and growth and meaning and success in your life, then definitely hit subscribe, because that's exactly the kind of content that we touch on the Badass Careers YouTube channel. I'd also love to see you over on my Instagram at Badass Careers, because I'm dropping tips over there on the daily. And I would love to hear from you. What is the toughest interview question in your opinion? Let me know in the comments down below, because I'm thinking about doing a series on interview questions. And if there's enough demand and if there are enough questions down there for me to make videos around, then let's frickin' do it. With all that said and done, I hope that you have a great week. Until next week's episode, I'll see you there. Stay badass, and I'll see you next time. Bye.